Welcome to video number 6 for the Web Development Workshop. I hope you're enjoying this course so far. In this video, we'll be covering more programming concepts such as loops and finally completing the events page. As there was a lot to cover in the previous video, we'll do a quick refresher on JavaScript. So now, I'll pass you off to Eric.
Yeah, so as we mentioned last time, we learned about variables. So just as a refresher, variables are containers for storing data values. So you could have a variable that stores a string like hello, or it stores a number like 32. Those are all examples of how you would use a variable. So like we said last time, we need to set our variables using the key term let. So for example, you could write let x is equal to 10, and that would just set your variable x as being 10. And variable names must start with either a letter. So usually that means your variable is either a single letter or a word. So you could have a variable named x or a variable named hello. You could also start your variable name with a $sign. So you could write $3. Or you could say like $hi. There would be appropriate variable names. Or an underscore. So you could do like underscore this or underscore var. And that would give you variable names that would also work. So I guess that's just like a kind of trivia thing. You know, you don't really end up using dollars and underscores to start your variable names. Mostly you'll just be using letters and words because at the end of the day, we want our code to be able to be read by other programmers. So naming your variables crazy things like ASDFGHJKL is very useless because people will be like, huh? What does that mean? So yeah, just keep in mind you want to try and keep your variable names ones that make sense and relate to your code. So like we mentioned last time, the main problem, or I guess letdown with variables, is that we can only store one thing at a time in our variable. So the example last time, I believe, was that we can't store both 1 and 2 inside a variable named x. We would have to use something else. And we're about to introduce that something else right now. So this is where arrays come in. So you might have heard of arrays before. You definitely would have heard of them if you've done a previous JavaScript workshop with us. Just put that out there. An array is a variable that stores multiple things at once. So we can make a new array as follows. So notice that we use the var keyword here. You could also replace it with let. It's just those two are basically interchangeable for our purposes at least. So you can replace the var with let, and we say our array name. So in the first example, it's numbers. And to show that it's an array, the most important thing to notice is we use our square brackets. So in our square brackets, we put our elements that go in our array. So for our first example, it's our numbers 1 to 6. And we remember that we have to separate each of our elements using a comma. Because if we didn't have a comma there, then we would instead just be storing 123,456 in an array, which is obviously not what we want. And for our second example, same thing. Just keep in mind, when we store strings, which is what our second array is storing, because as we can tell, they are words, we need to have quotation marks around the words, because otherwise the computer won't recognize that they're words, and then it might get confused and cause some errors, as computers generally tend to do. So now that we know how to make an array, you might be thinking, well, now we have a chain of things together, but what if I only wanted one of the things from the array? Well, Kenneth will now explain how we access elements within our array.
Yep, when accessing arrays, we can think of elements as consecutive blocks of data. Below we have an example of how an array of 3, 8, 1, 0, 5, -2, 32 would look like. So in our array below, we have a total of 7 indices, which we refer to as indexes. So in this array of length 7, something important to notice would be that indexes always start at the value 0. Indexes point to values within our arrays, which in this case is 3, 8, 1, and so on. Say we want to extract the value 1 from within our array. From our diagram, we would know that the value corresponds to the index 2 rather than 3, because array indexes always start from 0. And in JavaScript, we would access the value 1 of the array by typing in the index, which is 2, in the square brackets to get array square bracket 2, where array is the variable containing your, as you can guess, array. So instead of accessing just one element, what if we want to access every single element within an array? Well, we can go through all the elements of an array using a loop. There are two kinds of loop, for loops or while loops. So for most cases, they can be used interchangeably, but they both have their pros and cons. A loop, as the name suggests, performs a given operation over and over again until it satisfies the exit condition. For loops are generally used when looping through an array as it takes up less lines in code, but when the exit condition is complex or more abstract, while loops could be the better option. So for the next slide, Eric will be teaching us how to set up a for loop in JavaScript.
Of course. So the for loop is structured as follows. So I'll go through it line by line. Our first line is started with the keyword for. So this just tells our computer that it is a for loop. And in our brackets, we have 3 different things, and they're separated by semicolons. So it's important that you have your 3 things in the brackets, because otherwise your for loop won't work. And it's also important that you separate them using semicolons, because if it was all one block, again, your computer wouldn't understand, and it would probably create some errors. So our first statement in yellow is setting up. So this is basically the initial condition in the loop. It's how we start off. The green is a condition. This is basically what Kenneth said in our last slide, is the exit condition. So it's basically when we stop looping and stop running the code over and over again. And our last one is how to continue. So this is what gets updated every time you run the loop. So after you run the loop once, maybe one of your variables increases by 1, and then it keeps going over and over. So this is how to continue. And inside your curly brackets of your for loop is the code to be done over and over again. So that's where the comment is, do something as long as the condition is true. So for our code down here, for I equals to 0, so it means that we're starting out with I being equal to 0. Our condition is I is less than 5. So that means that our loop will stop when I is equal to 5 or bigger than 5. So while I is less than 5, it will keep running. And our last one, how to continue, is I is equal to I plus 1. So it's saying every time we run the loop, we make I bigger by 1, basically. So if we look through this loop, what do you guys think will happen after we run through this entire loop? So take some time, think about it, and answer will be revealed very shortly.
So here we have the console open on the right, and the first thing we want to do is, well, create the for loop. So we have the initializing statement, we have the exit condition. So I is less than 5, I plus plus. And here we will type console.log I. So now, when we press enter, this will now print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, if you got this right, give yourself a pat on the back. If you didn't get it right, well, that doesn't matter either. I'll give an explanation as to why this is the case. So obviously we start off at 0 because we have I declared to be 0. So we go print I, which will give us 0. And then we will then increment I by 1. This is what the plus plus means. So then I will become 1, and then we print 1. And this will keep going until we reach 4. So once we print 4 and then we increment it, it becomes 5. And 5 is no longer less than 5. And so the loop will terminate and we will now exit the loop. So as you guys notice, we actually have an error here. So uncaught syntax error, unexpected token, brackets. So if you have any issues with your JavaScript for your website, you actually see like which line it is and where it's actually coming from. So it's coming from events.js line number 10. So yeah, this is just some ways you can use the console to help you debug JavaScript for your website.
All right, so another kind of loop is the while loop. So here is an example of a while loop in JavaScript. So functionally, a while loop and a for loop are pretty much the same. The main difference is the way that they look in code and how they are structured. So you'll notice that we obviously don't have the word for in our example. We have instead the word while. And we haven't had our setting up condition in our actual loop. We just have it in our code. So it says num is equal to 0. Ideally, if you're doing it properly, it would be let num is equal to 0. But still, this is fine. The point gets across. And it says while num is less than 5. So you'll notice that we only have our exit condition. So the condition here is that the loop will keep running while the number is less than 5. And we see that we're missing our setup condition, but we already wrote that before the loop. And the last thing we're missing is the continuing condition, or like how we continue. So let's just keep the how we continue, or the fact that how we continue is missing in our minds for now, and take a look at the code. So it says console.log num is equal to, and then you have your number. So console.log, as we learned before, is just logging it in our console, so basically printing it out. And it's saying that our number is equal to what num is equal to, so that variable that we set earlier. And afterwards, we have the line num++. So plus might look a bit funny, but in programming, plus usually just means we're going up by 1. So what you'll notice is going up by 1 was the continuation condition for our last loop. And it is the continuation condition for this loop as well. Just that since it's a while loop, we have a new line to tell the computer how we're continuing. So as you can see, we will compare the loops on the next slide, but while loops and for loops basically do the same thing, but they look very different in code. So now let's take a look and see how these two loops are similar, but also different at the same time. So the highlighting of the color is done here, so you can see what parts match up. Our yellow is our setting up condition, so we can see it exists on both sides in different places. Our green is our continuation condition, so basically our exit condition. And we can see that, again, they're in different places on both sides. And lastly, we have our, I guess, the change condition, which is how our loop continues and changes every time, which is in red. So both times we're adding 1. So both of these snippets of code will print the numbers from 0 to 4, like we saw in Kenneth's demonstration earlier. But we can see that they look very different in code, and that the for loop is a lot shorter, which is why we tend to prefer for loops when we write the code out. So now I'll pass it over to Kenneth, who will talk to you about the events page and exactly what it entails, and then we have a bit of a checkpoint after that. So Kenneth, would you like to take over now?
In our events page for our website, we want to be able to create icons for all the different Olympic sports. Obviously, we can brute force this by manually creating each element in HTML, but that would take too much time. So how can we make a box for each element? As you guys can probably guess, we'll be using for loops. And this is what we mean when we're talking about generating elements dynamically. Now, as per the ritual, I will now sacrifice you to Eric for the following checkpoint.
Well, here I am again to give you guys work. I know, it's a bit of a tradition now, isn't it? So our checkpoint here is that we need to fill in the remaining code on events.js, and basically this will make our website finally dynamically generate the sports that we have in our list. So give that a try now using the for loop structure that we've learned, because we see the keyword for in our code. And once you've given that a go, come back to the video and you can check out the solution as per usual with the demonstration of Kenneth.
As usual, we have the solution below. I hope you guys actually paused the video and took the time to attempt the exercise, otherwise I'll be very sad. So on to the demonstration now. So for this exercise, your goal is to add the for loop conditions. We've given you guys a nice hint. The length of the array can be found using array.length. For example, sports.length. It just so happens that we have an array called sports here, which may or may not contain some of the sports for the Olympics. So we have archery, athletics, and etc. We're not going to type this all up manually, as we've said before, so let's fill in the for loop conditions. So if you guys can remember, an array always starts at the index of 0, so we'll start at 0. So the reason we use I is because below in our for loop we have these variables I, and if you guys notice, there was no declaration for these variables beforehand. So by process of elimination, you should be able to know that we'll be using I for the for loop. So for our exit condition, we want to keep going until I is greater than the length of the array or equal to the length of the array, in which case we know we've been through the entire array. And as per usual, we have the incrementing statement. We only want to go up by 1 in this case because we want to loop through every single element of the array. So say I want to loop through every 2 elements of the array, I'll have plus equals 2. Then I'll go through every single second element of the array. But in this case, we only want to go through every single element of the array. So now, right, it's not array.length, it's sports.length. So now when we click show, just give it a second, and we go inside events, we will now see that we actually generated each element dynamically. So yeah, this concludes the quick demonstration for the solution for this specific checkpoint.
Alright, thanks guys for watching. That is the end of the 6th episode of our web dev workshop. So just to recap, what we did today was we talked a bit about arrays and for loops, and we used these 2 ideas to update our events.js page so that it now properly generates our events at the Olympics, and it does it very smoothly through having it dynamically generated. So it saves you a lot of time compared to, manually making each image and each text item and then so on and so forth. So now I'll pass it over to Kenneth and he'll give you guys a bit of an idea about what we'll be doing in the next and final video of our series.
Sadly, the next video will also be the last for this workshop. And the only thing we have left to do is to create the timer in JavaScript. We'll be covering date and time objects and using functions to create a timer for our website. So this is Kenneth.
And this is Eric.
And we'll see you in the next episode.